Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. It's been a while since we've been together, but some things have been happening and things beyond our control. And so here we are back again, and we hope to be able to come to you a couple of times a week now. And if you'll subscribe to us, then when we come on the air, you'll get an email to that effect. And if you like us, or even if you don't like us, if you like hearing what we're saying, even though you may not agree with it, well, click on like. We'd appreciate that. Now, because it's been a while since we've been together, I'll go back and just bring us up to date real quick. The title of this series is "Who and Where is Israel Today?" And people say, well, they're all over here in the Middle East in a little place called Israel, and they're called Jews. And no, they're not over there in Israel, and they're not called Jews. But that's something you're going to find out as we go along here. So, by way of remembrance, let me just remind you: God promised Abraham, because Abraham obeyed God. God promised him three things. He said, "I'm going to give you, from you is going to come a seed." In other words, a man. And this man's going to be a blessing to the entire world. Well, we know who that was. That was Jesus Christ. Said also, I'm going to make of you is going to come a great nation. And also, it's going to come another great nation that's going to become a company or commonwealth of nations. Two great nations. Now, when God says great, He means greatest. He's saying, I'm going to, through your seed, Abraham, through your descendants, I'm going to have two nations created. One will be the greatest nation that's ever been on the face of the earth and ever will be. The other one will be an equally great nation that will become a company or commonwealth of nations. A commonwealth is when you have one nation and other nations deliberately and voluntarily place themselves under that nation's authority. In other words, that nation is the boss, and these other nations do what this nation tells them to do. He said, you're going to have one, just a single nation. Greatest nation ever. Then you're going to have this other great nation that many nations are going to voluntarily attach themselves to and be pretty much ruled by that nation. I'm going to give you a hint here as to where the Israelites are. Remember, the Bible is written to, for, and about Israel. Genesis to Revelation. It's all about Israel. Ask yourself this question: what is the greatest nation ever on the face of the earth? What nation is it that has been and is, and at this present time, the most powerful, the most prosperous nation? And it's the nation everyone wants to come to. This nation even has to build a wall to keep people out. Does that give you a hint? And what is the only other commonwealth of nations this world has ever seen? In fact, this nation was so great, its name was great at one time. It's losing that greatness, as is that most powerful nation. But who would that be? Think about it. And remember, God said these are going to be the descendants of Abraham. Abraham begat Isaac. Isaac begat Jacob, whom God called Israel. So these nations are going to be the two nations that God was talking about of Israel. And we're going to find out who those two nations are, and then we'll find out where the Israelites are, because His promise was to Abraham, through Isaac, through Jacob. Jacob was Israel, so the descendants, two of the descendants of Israel are now the world's greatest nation and the world's greatest commonwealth of nations. Who might that be? Well, if you know anything about history, you're beginning to catch on, because those are your Israelites. Just like God told Abraham. Through Israel, or Jacob, had these two nations. Okay, we'll find out who they are for sure. Jacob had 12 sons. Oh, well, let me get back to something right quick here that I think I left out last time. God's promises were related to Isaac, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, and then to the New Testament saints. Romans 15:8 says that Jesus Christ came to confirm the promises that God made to the fathers. Well, who are the fathers? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Because he made the same promises to each one as they came along. He reiterated that promise. Jesus came to create a new church, a new covenant church. It's in that is God's true church today. Today. And those promises are to that church. Because this church is comprised of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Jesus came for the purpose of confirming those promises to the fathers. Jesus is the head of the New Covenant Church. So the New Covenant Church and the Israelites, they're the same. Bear with me now, and I'll prove this. All right, very quickly. You remember how Jacob had these sons. One of them's name was Joseph. The other brothers sold him into slavery to Egypt. He went to Egypt, and the Pharaoh had these dreams, and he interpreted, or God interpreted through him those dreams, and Pharaoh made him the second most powerful man in Egypt. Just so happens Egypt was the most powerful nation on earth at that time. So Joseph became the second most powerful person on the planet. Pretty nice from being sold into slavery to becoming the second most powerful person in the world. Now remember, the famine came, and Pharaoh then remembered what Joseph had told him, and he said, what can I do for you? And by this time Joseph had played these tricks on his brothers who had come to buy grain. See, there was a famine all over the world except in Egypt. And so Jacob and his 69-membered family were still in Israel, where they were being starved. They're hungry. And so Pharaoh said, go get them. Bring them here. Well, anyhow, in 1850 BC, Israel, meaning Jacob, but who is called Israel, came to live in Egypt, and there were 70 of them. Now I'm going to be giving you some figures, and I want you to pay close attention to this. So they came into Egypt, and they were there about 400 years. Now, these people reproduced very rapidly. They had huge families. And so they came in with 70. 70 people came in from with Jacob. 69 with Jacob. And they were there about 430 years. Now, remember, they were so prolific when they reproduced that Pharaoh, and this was generations later, 400 years later, many generations later, the Pharaoh and the Egyptians began to get afraid, because they said, these people are going to outbreed us here. They're going to get so big and so many, they're going to come against us and defeat us. And so that's when Pharaoh said, we got to kill off all the boy babies. And this is how Moses' mother saved him, by putting him in the little basket in the river, and you know the story about that. Well, you know the story about Moses being called of God. He went back to Egypt and got the people to come out. So in 1447 BC, Israel came out of Egypt. Now the estimates of the number of people that came out, the number of Israelites and others, as I'll point out, that came out of Egypt, range anywhere from 1 million to 5 million. Well, I've chosen 3 million because I think that's probably about right. Okay, now think about this. They came out with approximately 3 million people after 430 years. So look how rapidly they went in with 70, came out with about 3 million people after 400 years. Now, today, 3,400 years later, can you imagine how many Israelites there are? If they went from 70 to 3 million in 400 years, how many are there going to be after 3,400 years? Hundreds of millions of people. But there are only about 20 million Jews. The Jews have an office in New York City where they keep up with their population. So they can tell you real close at any time how many of them there are, and there are about 20 million. Where are the others? Where are all those hundreds of millions of other Israelites? What happened to them? They're not Jews. See, one thing we must understand. All Jews are Israelites because Judah was a tribe of the tribe of Israel. But not all Israelites are Jews. Only those people from Judah are Jews. It's like saying that all Texans are Americans, but not all Americans are Texans. You see. So when people say Jews, they're saying all of Israel. Well, that's not true. Simply not true. Now, let me point something out here. Very important that you understand this. When God called the children of Israel out, led them out by Moses, He told them on the night before they were to leave, the next night, He said, I want you to kill a lamb, and you know the story. You had to dress it in a certain way, cook it in a certain way, eat it in a certain way, standing with your staff in your hand, and you must not go outside the building, and on the threshold of the building you had to put the blood of the lamb. And He said, anyone who does not do this, and that meant Israelites, Egyptians, everybody, said the death angel will come through on that night and kill the firstborn. That's why all the Egyptians in the night, the firstborn of the family died. And He said, the only people that the death angel will pass over, the only people will be those who observe what we call the Passover feast. In other words, they observe Passover. Okay, now listen to this. It says in the book of Genesis that as the Israelites left Egypt, it says a mixed multitude came out with them. In other words, these were Gentiles. They were not Israelites. These were probably captives from Egyptian wars. And they bring those captives home, make slaves out of them. But it says a mixed, meaning many different kinds of Gentiles. These were Gentiles. You see, the Israelites have always welcomed Gentiles into their kingdom. Well, this mixed multitude came out, and God says, He says, once they got out, he talked to them, and He said, now every year at this time, and your year starts now, He said. And this took place in latter April, early May. That's when God's year begins. And He said, 14 days from this day, every year, you'll hold Passover to celebrate the Passover back there. But now I want you to understand something. In order for these Gentiles to become spiritual Israelites, which is what He's talking about, they had to do two things. They had to observe Passover. Remember what He said back in Egypt? He said, if you're going to go out, you must observe Passover. So these Gentiles killed a lamb, dressed it the way God said, cooked it the way God said, consumed it the way God said, got rid of the refuse like God said, put the lamb's blood on the doors of their homes. These were Gentiles. And so God let them leave with the Israelites, a mixed multitude. And we don't know how many there were, but a multitude is a lot of people. Okay, here's this group of Gentiles. You got these 12 tribes of Israel and these Gentiles. Do you ever hear about the tribes of the tribe of Gentiles? No, because they accepted the God of Israel. They observed the Passover. They did what he said. They obeyed him, and he took them into his family, the 12 tribes of Israel, and they intermarried into the different tribes and became spiritual Israelites. Okay, another thing that they had to do, God told them when they came out, he said, one law will govern the homeborn, which he called biological Israelites, and the strangers, which would be the Gentiles. Once those strangers became involved with and became adopted by the Israelites, they all had one law. And he gave them that law on Mount Sinai about 2 weeks later. Remember, he brought them out, took them to Mount Sinai, and he said to them, I'm going to speak to you, and you must believe and obey everything I say. And they said with their own lips, all of this big 3 million people, including the Gentiles, ex-Gentiles, he said, whatever you tell us, we will do. Well, he told them, audibly spoke to them the 10 Commandments and wrote it in stone. Wrote those commandments in stone with his own finger. Is that serious? Yeah. John 3:16 is not written in stone with God's finger, but the 10 Commandments are. Does that tell you how important they are to God? Well, it should. Okay, now, where are these people? What are we looking at? Well, we're going to get there. Hold on with me now. Now, Israel, here's Israel. They're on the side of the Jordan River, on the eastern side of the Jordan River, getting ready to go to cross, and God says, okay, I want you, Joshua, I want you to send people in there. I want them to scout out the land for 40 days and bring back a report. And they did. Well, you remember, they brought back fruit and vegetables and things. The land was just flowing with milk and honey and giants. You remember that? They came back and said, oh no, we can't go in there and take over that land. There are giants in there. Well, the people just went berserk and turned against God and didn't believe God. And God said, okay, for every day that you scouts were in there, you're going to spend a year wandering around in the desert. And you know how that happened. And they wandered for 40 years. I've seen a map of where all they went, you know. And it had to be, can you imagine, you're sitting over here on this side, you're looking across the river at the promised land, flowing with milk and honey, great big limbs of grapes and everything over there, and all kinds of fruits and vegetables. And you can't go because you don't believe God. So for 40 years they wandered around until that older generation died off. They finally got back together. Joshua put them together and led them across the Jordan River. Little known fact, the Jordan River dried up. The words the Bible uses is that the Jordan River stopped flowing. Right here's where the Israelites are. They're going to go across. There's Jericho. I've been right there. I've been right there. And it was during flood season, as you would know. God's going to do something. He's going to do it in an impossible situation. It was the flood season. The river was out of its banks. It was just flowing. It flows fast anyway. And the river stopped flowing. I mean, this water in it, and the water stopped right here. And people have poo-pooed that all these years. Oh, that didn't happen any more than the Red Sea crossing happened. Well, God has a way of throwing a wrench into people's engines. Of late, and I've seen this particular thing in writing, archaeologists were digging around an area called, what used to be called Adam. I'm not sure what it is. It was a city named Adam, A-D-A-M. And the Bible says that the water backed up to Adam, to a village called Adam. Well, just recently, we're talking about the last 10 years, archaeologists found a written, well, what they did, they would make get clay, smooth it out real good while it's wet, write things in there, and then let it dry. And then it was preserved pretty well. And they found one of those. And on it, it talked about the Jordan River backing up to a city called Adam. God doesn't lie, folks. God tells you the truth. And that's exactly what he said in his word, and that's exactly what these unbelieving archaeologists found. That the people that lived then talked about the river backing up to a place called Adam. Okay, we need to move on. Okay, they got into the promised land, and things went along, and God began to put judges over the people. He would speak to the judges, and the judges would tell the people and force the people to obey what God had said. Well, now let's come to one of these judges. His name was Samuel. You know the story of Samuel. Samuel's one of the people I look forward to meeting. I want to talk to this man. But anyhow, the people got tired of Samuel. Well, why did they get tired of him? Because he spoke God's word, and he enforced God's word. And whatever God said, that's what Samuel said, and he didn't say anything else. He didn't ad lib, he didn't add anything to it or take anything from it. And the people said, we're tired of this. They looked around, and this is what it says, and they said, we want a king. We don't want God. He's talking to Samuel. We don't want God telling you what to say, and then you tell us. We want a king like these heathen over here. We want a king to rule us like their kings rule them. Yeah, because you can manipulate a king, and a king's just one of you. You know, well, Samuel was not one of them. Samuel was way up here. He was an Israelite, but he was different, okay? They didn't like that. Well, anyhow, God said, okay, I'm going to give them what they want. And Samuel was very, very distraught, because he had done an excellent job, and the people rejected him, and he murmured a little bit to God. God said, no, Samuel, you got it wrong. He said, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. So ladies and gentlemen, when you reject what a man of God tells you, you're not rejecting that man, you're rejecting God. So you better be careful who you say is not of God or who you reject, but always check them out. This is why I tell you, don't take my word for anything. Go to the Bible and find out for yourself. Well, here we are. Well, Saul, you know the story of Saul. Saul didn't turn out very well, and so God killed him off and his sons and appointed David. Well, David, of course, he had his problems, but he wound up being a very good king. And then when he died, Solomon took his place. Well, you know, Solomon's supposed to be this very intelligent man, wise and everything. Well, Solomon fell off the limb too, and became one of the most wicked kings the nation ever had, and married all these heathen women and brought their religions in and had the people worshiping their gods and things. Well, God got rid of Solomon, and the next in line was a man named Rehoboam. And Solomon had Israel built up to the point that they were probably never a nation like them before or since, in that part of the world anyway. And they were just, people came from all over. Remember, the Queen of Sheba made a special trip just to see the grandeur of Israel. Well, he did that through taxation, and he taxed the people something fierce. Well, Rehoboam, his son, said, I'm going to tax you even more. Well, that's when things really took a bad turn. That's when the 10 nationed northern kingdom. If you look at Israel, here's Judah, and here's where the descendants of Judah and Benjamin and some of the Levites lived. And here's the river, and up here, up north, is where the other 10 tribes lived, called Samaria. This is called Judea, this is called Samaria. Well, these folks they're in charge. You see, David was of the tribe of Judah, so Judah was calling the shots, the tribe, and Jeroboam was a Judahite, as they call him. And when he said, we're going to tax you more, these 10 said, no, you're not. And they broke off and became 2 nations, 2 houses, the house of Judah, the house of Israel. This group up here were called Israel. And they even went to war, because Judah said, no, we're not going to let you go. And God said, let them go. This is of me. This is part of what I'm doing here. Anyhow, so the Israelis split. They went off by themselves over taxation. Remember, get this straight. You've got Jews. These are descendants of the tribes of Judah. Benjamin was a tiny, tiny tribe. Paul was a part of that. And some of the priests of the tribe of Levi. See, Levi his descendants did not have land appointed. They lived among all the other tribes so that they could be their priests. Levites were the priests of all the tribes. Well, some of those priests stayed up here in Jerusalem with the tribe of Judah and Benjamin and became Jews. Now, the word Jew, ladies and gentlemen, there is no word like that in the Hebrew language. The word Jew is a nickname given to the Judahites by the translators. King James translators just nicknamed them Jews. That's where we get the word Jew. Now, the Jews didn't call themselves that at that time. See? And then, and I'm going to wrap it up here in just a minute, after a while, the northern tribes, the 10 northern tribes, actually 11 by this time, I'll explain later, became so wicked, so evil, that God sent the Assyrians in to defeat them. And in about 720 BC, they not only defeated them, but killed off a bunch of them and took every Israelite from the northern kingdom to Assyria and made them slaves. Okay? And then about 150 years later, Jeremiah is warning them all the times that God's going to do the same thing to you that he did to the northern tribe if you don't repent. And they didn't believe it, and well, you know what happened. The Babylonians came, attacked them, defeated them, killed off hundreds of thousands of them, and took the remainder of them to Babylon as their slaves. And so here we have the land of Israel, what we call Israel today, the promised land. Nobody there. The Jews are not there. The Israelites are the northern kingdom, they're not there. Well, that's when the so-called Palestinians, the people that came in and began to take part of that land. But there's a lot of the story we don't have time to get into. But we'll stop there today, and when we pick up next time, we're going to be talking about what God said in the Old Testament about scattering the people of Israel. This is why we don't know where they are, or some of us do, but most people don't. They were scattered. Well, where did they go? We'll find out next time. Until next time, remember, if you like us, click on like. We'd appreciate it if you subscribe to us so you'll know when we bring you one of these programs. And until next time, study the Word of God.